So we've come to the end of the two-day Valencia test with MotoGP. Now yesterday we spoke with you a lot about the tyre situation. So we thought today, from a technical point of view, let's talk about the electronics, the software, this new unified software that is going to be brought out across the entire MotoGP grid once we line up for Qatar. Now, you might wonder, well, why didn't they just do everything in one go yesterday? So that's the first thing we'll address. When you make any changes to a bike, you obviously need to find out how they affect the machine, which is why yesterday, generally teams started with their bike that they raced on Sunday, put in the Michelin tyres, and that's then how they found out, right, this is how different the tyres feel, the front and the rear. If you were to put in the software at the same time, something might happen with the bike. There might be a bit of movement in certain areas and you wouldn't exactly be sure, well, does this come from the tyre or does this come from the software? So that's why they started with that. Now today, you saw teams working a little bit more on the software front, especially the Repsol Honda guys and the Movistar Yamaha lot. Scott Redding, he was actually the only one to start from scratch with that software because he'd also made a full-on bike change. So any changes he was going to feel would be unfamiliar anyway, so that didn't really matter. Now, why is the software so important? Where does this importance come from? Let's explain it. The factory software, that's essentially the most advanced software you can possibly get. It has so many different functions you can adjust. Now, one example, we actually stood in the final corner here in Valencia. You can just see down from the fast turn number 13 down into 14. I'll give you an example of exactly how the electronics might work. Coming down into this corner, you'd have engine braking. Now, the electronics, they can adjust the engine, say, right, how much engine braking do you want? Engine braking essentially determines how much resistance goes to the rear wheel, and you're slowing down the bike with the rear wheel. So that's one part of the electronics. Then you naturally get things like certain lean angle sensors. Depending on how much lean you've got, you might get more or less engine braking. And then when you come out of the corner, get hard on the gas, then you'll have traction control, stopping the rear wheel spinning up too much, giving you the maximum traction. And then as you go onto the straight, anti-wheelie. So those are just a few functions of the electronics. And the factory teams, well, so far they've had such advanced, I mean, their electronics have been so advanced that they've been looking butter smooth around here. With the Manetti Marelli Spec ECU, that's the ultimate goal until we get to Qatar. A few people voiced a few concerns that, look, it's not quite as good as we'd expected. Some people even said, you know, it feels like the electronics from 5-6 years ago. But you've all got to take these things with a little bit of a pinch of salt, because think of it this way. You've got to have, you've got so many parameters. It's kind of like a giant crossword which you need to fill out. The factory guys had already filled theirs out. Now you're essentially been given a blank sheet of paper, which is why we've also seen so much track time at this test. You just need to do the laps. You need to start putting in the numbers, putting in the values, gauging all the parameters. And not just that, it's also a case of adjusting it to the Michelin tyres, because any data which you may have had before was with the Bridgestone tyres. So Michelin tyres, unified software, but also how does this unified software vary once we get to Qatar? Where's the big difference? Well, it's meant to be a more level playing field. For instance, factory software going across race distance, the software was so clever that it could actually detect how the tyres were wearing and could then adjust the traction control and engine braking accordingly. Certain functions like that are not going to be brought in because they want to make the software a lot more cost effective. They want to make it a lot easier for the teams to get onto the bikes, and it's also going to arguably bring in a little bit more rider skill. So as we said, this software, a really complex issue. It's not easy to judge. You can't just take it for granted that, well, now it's not as good as the factories. Well, they've only had 2 days to test it, but certainly keep an eye out once we get to the next round of testing. It's going to be Sepang, Phillip Island, and then Qatar before we even get to the Qatar race. So certainly many interesting topics to look forward to.